Let's see how to make this game in Construct 2. Click New Project, select New Empty Project and Open. Modify the property name for our new project, change it to Bomberman-Inspired. You can modify the version, description, author, etc. We will also modify the window size property to 576 and 576. We can change also the property full screen in browser from letterbox scale to off. This will act as a kind of window in our browser when playing. Then select the layout 1 and modify its name to level. The layout is the white square we can see in the middle of our screen. We will change its size to also 576 by 576, and if you hold down the Control key and scroll the mouse wheel, we can zoom in and zoom out our layout view to adapt to our screen size. In the View ribbon at the top, you can click on Snap to Grid, and the grid will be 32 by 32, which is nice for now. You can also, if you want, show the grid. It's not a requisite for our game. We will be now adding some objects to our project. You can either right-click on object types and insert a new object, or just double-click in the layout view. We will first add a tiled background. You can double-click or insert and just position it wherever you want. We will be opening and loading an image from the file in the image editor, and you can go to the folder where all the graphics assets are and select background tile in the folder blocks of the Bomber Sprites folder. Double-click, here it is, and it will repeat itself. You can then move it around, position it, and change its dimension to cover the whole layout background. I will now hide the grid, and you can see our pattern is just repeating itself. We will be adding some new object now, which will be a sprite, and the sprite will be one of the block. The solid block first. You can open. It's a 64 by 64 texture, and this will be our solid blocks that can't be exploded. To do so, we will be adding a behavior to our object, and we will actually change its name first to block, and you can see it's modified also in the object types, and then so add a behavior and make it a solid behavior. This will be useful later on when we will be adding our character. If you hold on the Control key and drag drop the object, you are making a new instance of the object, and you can select multiple instances and copy them in the same order of ID. For now, I will just make a quick surrounding. Here it is. We can also add another new object, yet a sprite again. Open and make it an explodable block. This block, when touched by the flame of an explosion, will be destroyed. So we change its name to E block, E for explodable block, and add yet again a behavior solid to it. That's all we need for now. Later on, you'll be able to make new instances of it and just make your level design as you want. For now, I will just go and add a new object, the character object. To do so, we are going into the Layers tab. You can see at the moment we only have layer 0. We will rename that layer by the way to background. and we will be creating a new layer on top of it, which we'll name character. Now, if I double click in the layout view and add yet again a sprite, you can see the tooltip names character. It means that the object I'm creating will be created in the layer character. It's a layer which is on top of the previous one we've already seen. Also, we will be using another method to import our frames. Go into the animation frames dialog, right click and import frames. Go back to the folder Bomberman sprites and go to the Bomberman. We will first use the texture from the side folder. Select all the frames, select the first frame and hold down the shift key. This selects all our frames and you can then open them. The first frame is still empty, so you can just use the delete key from your keyboard to delete it. In the animations, we will rename our animation to right, because obviously the character is going on the right, and we will modify a bit of its properties. The speed we will change to 16, which means that all the 8 frames will be played twice in a second, and we will also want it to loop. For now, that's it. As you can see, my character, by being on the character layer, appears on top of the objects which are on the background layer. So the explodables block and the solid block. Obviously my character can't be just one single animation to the right. If you refer to the demo, you know that it goes to the right, to the left, to up and down, which is a kind of perspective of going in front of us and going back. So in the animations dialog, right click, add animation. We will add a new animation that will name down. Select it. You have once again a new animation, and as previously we will be importing frames from our object files. We are selecting now the folder front, selecting all the frames, open, delete the first frame and modify the speed property to 16 as well as the loop. Once again, add an animation, left, import frames, and now we are going back to side, import the frames, and we will be using a little trick, if you will. There is a mirror button right there, and if you hold shift while clicking it, it will reverse, be mirroring all the frames of our animation at once. Modify yet again the properties, speed to 16 and looping, and add yet another animation which is up. And this time we will be importing frames from the folder back. Delete the first frame, modify the properties. Here it is, 16 and yes. So here we have our 4 animations for our character, which gives us the perspective and the impression that it's moving around. Right now is a good time to have a first preview of our project. So go back to the layout view, and at the top of the editor you can click on the Run Layout button. You can see our character is like looping as its animation looping. Our project appears in a kind of window with borders, and we have our several elements. When you select your character, you can see there is a point which is in the middle, actually, at the moment, and there is quite some space on top of the character, which won't be exactly what we will want. We will want our character to appear as if it's moving in a 64 by 64 square, like this, to the left of the or the right, or up and down. And to do so, we will want also our point right there to be a bit down up there. So let's see how to do it. Double click our sprites, and the point I was referring to is the origin point. So let's click on this, and we do have here the X and Y positions of our point, and we will want to set it to X32, but the Y will be 96, and this point will be at the exact same position in every frames of every animations. So right click on the origin right there and apply to all animations. Confirm, yes, and if you select any frame, you can see the point is now at the same position, whatever the animation or the frame is. What this changes, as you can see now, the point is not in the middle of our image, but slightly beneath. And if I position it, right now I have the impression I want, which is the head of the character is above the blocks and is above the explodable blocks. Also, you can see that the position property of my object right there corresponds to the position of this origin point. Another modification I need to do right there is to change the name to Bomber, since it would be a bomber. It's always nicer to change the name of the object. It makes it easier to see in our list what the object is supposed to be and supposed to do. I will be adding a few behaviors to this object also. I will need the 8 direction behavior, as well as the bound to layout. Bound to layout is maybe not necessary, but in case you would do a level design where you don't have solid blocks on the sides of your screen, the bomber could actually go outside of the screen. I will show you right now. It could actually just leave the screen. So I will yet modify some of the property, which is set the angle to no and modify the directions to 4 directions. This property there will make it so that the character won't go in diagonal. It will either go left and right or up and down, which is kind of the behavior we want. And if I run the layout and for now just use the arrow key of my keyboard, you can see I can move my character around. And as I was saying before, there is the bound to layout, so even though there isn't a solid object, I can't go outside of the layout. And you can also notice that even there I'm blocked, I'm stuck. I can't go further, and I can't go up. I can't go on the right. I can go down, but I can't go up. I can go left. And right there is the same. That's because the collision polygon for our sprite at the moment is that big, where in fact I wish it was just a single square right there. So we are going to modify that just now. Go back into the sprite, and this time it's the icon just underneath the image point, the collision polygon. And as you can see right now, it takes the whole size of our sprite. But what I want actually is more like a square like this. And which will allow me to move around and have the perspective I'm looking for. So right now I've just did it approximatively, but I have the correct positions for each point of my polygon. I want the X to be 8 and the Y there to be 68. I've noted down the coordinates on my notepad and found them by trial and error. There I want 56 and 68. There I want 8 and 120. And finally I want there 56 and 120. Here it is. And pretty much like for our image point, the collision polygon will be the same for all the frames of all our animations. So right click and apply to all animation. This right click there will apply the collision polygon. So apply to all animation, confirm, and as you can see now, any frame of any animation has the same size. And so if I go back and test now our projects, you can see that it feels more like what I wanted. The character can move only by a square, and it feels more natural and gives the perspective I'm wanting. So at the moment I'm using the arrow keys of my keyboard to control my character, thanks to the default controls property. But we will change it to no and actually handle this those inputs through the event sheet. So first I will put back the solid objects right there, and I will need a few instance variables first to control the logic, the movement of my character as I want. Instance variables you can add and are kind of properties that you will have access to through the logic of your game. So add a new one and let's name it direction. It will be a number and the initial value will be -1. The direction will be allowing me to know in what direction my character is going. Is it going to the right, to the left? Is it going up or down? And you can maybe already guess how this will be useful for us to determine what animation to display. We will also need to add the speed step variable, which will be yet again a number, and the initial value will be kept to 0 for now. The speed variable we will also use for our movement, and we will by default have an initial value of 128, and add also a move time, which will be 0.25, and this variable will be the one we will use and modify when we get the power-ups of the shoe to make the character move faster. And finally a timer, because and keep it to 0, and this variable there we will be, when I will be pressing a key, this timer and this move time will actually be the what allows me to control the distance that the character is moving through. So for the variables it's okay, and now we can go into the event sheet. So the event sheet is where we set all the logic of our game. Actually I need first to add yet another plugin, and this will be an input this is the keyboard, because I will want to register what key I am pressing or holding down to know what type of movement or what type of action the user is wanting to do. So insert and go into the event sheet, and we will be adding a group to gather the events for our inputs. So right click, add a group, and name it player 1 controls. Okay, it will be active on start, and you can add a sub-event when you select and right-click on our group. Add a sub-event, and this time go into the keyboard. Key is down, and the key for our first player going to the right will be the F key. So, OK, and down. You can expand the group. The event sheet is read from the top to the bottom. So whenever the game is executing, it will check for every event to see if the conditions, so right there our condition is the key F from our keyboard is pressed down, it will execute its actions. And the action we will want right there for our player is to set a direction and set an animation. I will need actually a little trick I will be adding. So right click, add a global variables. Global variables are some place in memory which keep a value and that we can either modify or access during our game's execution. And I will be using an interesting trick right there, which is make this variable constant. The fact that it is constant will mean that I won't be able to modify the value of this variable, but what I will be able to do is, for example, to name it dirac to a number 0, and I will have 4 variables like that. I will name another down and have its value at 90. Yet another. So like for the instances, if you hold the control key down and drag drop an event, an action, or even a variable, you can see it makes a copy of the variable. And so there I will name it left. Its value will be 180. And finally up, and the value will be 270. So what those will do is actually in construct at the moment the angle of this object, you can see here in the properties, is 0, and if I'm modifying it to 90, I'm facing down. 180, I'm facing left. 270, I'm facing up. And so what I will be using those variables for is that when my key F is down, I will add an action. I will want the variable direction of my bomber to be right. So right there it's more readable, but to the logic it's the value there, 0, that will be applied to direction, and it makes the code easier to understand. And I will also want to modify the animation I'm playing, and I'm playing the animation right from the beginning. It's okay. And if I'm changing the event, making a new one, Right there I will want to go down, so the S key, no, the D key, my bad. D key will be down. Okay, and playing the animation down. S will play and go left, and play the left animation, and finally the E key will allow me to go up. Here it is. So make sure that the name of your animation is exactly the name you have given in the sprite object. So write with a capital R is not right with a not capital R. It's case sensitive. Also, a little note on why I've chosen to use ESDF and not WASD. It's because I'm French, if you can have already noticed, and the keyboard I'm using actually is an AZERTY keyboard, and so to me the W key is actually in the place of the Z key on your keyboards, and it just makes it very strange. And by using ESDF, those letters are positioned whether it's a QWERTY or AZERTY keyboard. So always have in mind your international audience. It's a kind of advice I tend to give because it's always nicer, and it's really awful to have to play and to be forced to play with WASD on our keyboards. It's just awful. If I go now and just have a try at our project, I'm pressing S, D, F, E. It's changing the animation of our character, but it's not moving right now. To do this movement, we will need to add a new group. Add a new group and calls it Bombers Movement. Okay, so the way I'm doing it, I could directly set the events for the movement directly in those events, but what I will be wanting to do is that for now I'm just using one bomber, but in the end our game will be possibly a multiplayer game, and I will just want to be able to make a new instance of a bomber and have this bomber being controlled by different keys than this one. And to do so, I'm actually registering the inputs in this group, and this group there will handle the movement itself. I need to add yet another constant variable, and this one will be named neutral, and the value will be -1. Remember how I set the direction to -1 there? It means by default the direction is neutral, and that's how I will be using it. In our bombers movement, I will add a sub-event and first check that our direction is not equal to neutral. And then, as a sub-event, I will check on the direction, on the current direction, and so check if the direction is to the right. So you can see I could use directly those numbers to check the current angle I'm wanting and willing to use, but using constants it's more readable. I know there that I'm checking and that's in this particular event, a sub-event. This will be where I will set our bomber to go to the right. And to do so, I will modify the x value of our bomber and set it to self.x. The keyword self refers to the bomber itself in this case. The self keyword refers to the object we are inside and setting the action for. And we will add self.speed multiplied by dt. dt is a system expression that calculates the elapsed time between a frame and another during the execution of our game. And so it makes it that if I wasn't using dt right there, I would add the value of speed, so 128 every tick, to our bomber. On a computer that executes 60 frames per second, it will make a certain amount, a certain distance, a certain amount of pixels. But if the computer was a bit slower and would only execute to 30 frames per second, it would mean that the bomber would only travel half the distance of the more powerful computer. Using the dt expression right there and multiplying it, it allows me to be sure that during a second of execution of my game, whatever the frame rate is, I will only travel by 128 pixels. And I also need to add this same dt to our timer. This way, I will show you later. And so if I go and check it out right there, you can see now I'm moving on the right. And I'm moving on the right in constant. I mean, just pressing once, I'm not touching my keyboard, it's still going. So I will want now to do about the same to our left direction. And instead of adding right there, I will remove, because the x coordinate goes from 0 to whatever. So here it will be 576. So there you can see the x is 64, 224, 416, etc., etc. And for the directions up and down, so I will first go for down, it's about the same, but instead of x, I will be changing the y position and just modify it by the same way. So going down, I'm adding, it's the same, and when I'm going up, I'm removing. Here it is. And so if I test now, I'm going right, I'm going left, I'm going up, and I'm going down. So we have movement. What I want now is to stop that movement after a while. So I will be adding yet a new sub-event and check. And that's where our timer value, and check if it's greater or equal to self dot move time. So remember our 0.25 from up there. And when I'm doing so, I will be setting the value of direction to neutral. So this will stop our character. And so if I test, going right, and it stops, going up, and it stops, going down, and it stops going left, etc. And if I'm pressing and keeping pressed, it's keep on moving, which is what I want. At the moment, actually, I will need to go back to our input right there and make a little modification and add actually more conditions to it, because it can be problematic at the moment, because nothing prevents me from pressing F and S at the same time and trying to go left and down at the same time, for example. And so to do so, I will add another condition yet in the bomber and compare the direction, make sure it's not equal to dir up. I'm just making sure that I'm not already going up or down, and so that I can go on the right or on the left. And this will be the same conditions for this event, and right there I will want to check if I'm not already going on the left or on the right. And go there. It's good. And finally, I need just to add yet another sub-event right there to compare if I'm going into a neutral direction at the moment, and when I'm going into a neutral direction, I will reset the timer. So the value timer set to 0. I will also want to set the animation frame to 0, whatever the animation is playing, and actually stopping the animation, because I'm not hitting a key on the keyboard anymore, so I want just my character to stop. And so right now you can see I'm pressing once, I'm making a few steps, and so it feels better and it feels more like what I wanted it to do. Finally, a last issue we can have is if the bomber is overlapping a solid block or an explodable block. As you see, at the moment the character is he is moving around, and that's not what I want. I would want it to feel like it's stuck or can't move from there. So to do so, we will need to add in the bomber movement yet another sub-event, and we will check if the bomber is overlapping a block, and we'll right click the event and make it a OR block and check if it's overlapping a block or a E block object. And when it's doing so, I will set the direction to neutral, which will stop our bomber from moving. And I will also reposition it, set its position in a specific place. So set position. And this is where a bit of math will come in use. We will set it so as an integer, and we will check the current X position, divide it by 64, since that's the size of our blocks and E blocks, multiply it by 64, and so this right there will give us only an integer, and add 32 to it, which is half of the it will position it in the middle of a square where it should be. And we will do the same with the Y. Since we are using squares, and so if I'm testing it again, I need actually to position the character a bit better. Here it is. As you can see now, I'm not moving. So yes, it's startling a bit, but it's a small price to pay, in my opinion. And when I'm... So now it really does feel like the old Bomberman movement. It also allows us something like that. You can see it's repositioning, and so it will make it easier sometimes to move where you are wanting to move. Instead of just getting stuck into a block, you are still moving around as you should. So yeah, that's about it for the movements. In the next video I will be dealing with the making bombs and explosions to make the explodable blocks disappear and add more mechanics to our game. Thanks for checking it out.